What happens to the global reputation of a rising economic power when its flagship international carrier begins failing basic safety inspections at the world's most stringent airports? In January, European regulators recorded a staggering fault ratio of 1.96 for Air India aircraft, a number that flirted dangerously with the threshold that triggers mandatory operational restrictions across the continent. This is not merely a story of mechanical wear and tear, but a high-stakes investigation into a systemic collapse of oversight that threatens to derail India's ambitions of becoming a global aviation hub. We are going to uncover how a $400 million refurbishment plan fell apart, why 70% of a major fleet is suffering from recurring technical defects, and how a pattern of regulatory negligence under the current administration has left the nation's wings clipped just as it tries to soar. The stakes of this safety crisis extend far beyond the comfort of a cabin seat. They represent a fundamental challenge to India's sovereignty in the international skies. If Air India fails to lower its fault ratio below the critical 2.0 mark, the European Aviation Safety Agency could move from scrutiny to active bans, effectively isolating Indian travelers and crippling the nation's connectivity with the West. The geopolitical cost of such a failure would be immense, signaling to the world that India's rapid infrastructure growth is built on a foundation of hollow oversight. Success, on the other hand, requires a total overhaul of the country's aviation DNA, moving from a culture of getting by to one of absolute technical precision. Currently, the airline is trapped in a transitional purgatory, struggling to reconcile the legacy of state-owned decay with the aggressive expectations of private ownership under the Tata Group. To understand the current rot, we must look at the historical handoff from the government to the private sector. For years, the carrier was treated as a bureaucratic extension of the state, leading to a culture where engineering lapses were often met with silence rather than solutions. The transition to the Tata Group was supposed to be the panacea, yet the administration of Narendra Modi has been criticized for overseeing a regulatory environment that allowed standards to slide significantly before the sale. Critics argue that the government's failure to maintain the fleet's airworthiness during the final years of state control left the new owners with a toxic asset. This incompetence at the ministerial level created a massive technical debt that is now coming due, manifesting as a fleet where 37% of aircraft are over a decade old. A stark contrast to domestic rivals like Indigo, which maintains a modern fleet with only 7% of aging hulls. The key actors in this struggle are the European regulators, the Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation, and the leadership at Air India. While CEO Campbell Wilson has attempted to project a vision of transformation through the Vihayan.ai initiative, the reality on the ground is far grimmer. The DGCA has been forced to issue show-cause notices for extreme violations, such as operating 8 scheduled flights without a mandatory airworthiness permit. This level of oversight failure points directly back to the government's inability to enforce basic safety protocols. The motivations are clear. The airline is desperate to avoid the financial bleeding of 15,000 crore rupees in annual losses, while regulators are scrambling to prevent another catastrophe following the fatal Boeing 787 crash in June 2025. The tension lies in the fact that safety costs money and time, 2 things the airline currently lacks. Recent data presented in the Indian Parliament reveals a staggering lack of operational discipline. Over 70% of the Air India Group fleet experiences recurring technical defects, the highest rate among all reviewed carriers. This is not a series of isolated incidents, but a widespread engineering crisis. Although the fault ratio recently dipped to 1.76 after intense regulatory pressure, it remains nearly double the benchmark of 1.0 held by the world's safest airlines. The supply chain has become a convenient scapegoat for the delay in retrofitting Boeing 777 and 787 aircraft, with vendors now pushing delivery dates into late 2028. However, the root cause remains a delayed start and a lack of early-stage government investment in the maintenance ecosystem. The financial reality is even more sobering. Despite a capital infusion of nearly 10,000 crore rupees, analysts estimate the airline requires up to 25,000 crore rupees annually just to keep its head above water. We must now consider two distinct what-if scenarios that will define the next decade of Indian aviation. In the first, the European Aviation Safety Agency loses patience and imposes a yellow card on Indian carriers, similar to restrictions placed on developing nations with poor safety records. This would lead to an immediate collapse in ticket sales and a massive flight of capital, as international partners like Singapore Airlines might reconsider their long-term commitments to the joint venture. The geopolitical consequence would be India's demotion in the global aviation hierarchy, forcing its citizens to rely on foreign Gulf carriers for international travel. In the second scenario, the new head of engineering, Jeremy Yu, successfully implements Singaporean technical standards across the board, but only after the government is forced to step back and allow for a truly independent regulatory body. This would require the Modi administration to admit that its current oversight model has failed and to cede control to a more transparent, technocratic authority. The airline's losses are projected to exceed 15,000 crore rupees by the end of March 2026, creating a financial black hole that even the vast resources of Tata Sons may struggle to fill. The struggle is emblematic of a broader national challenge. The gap between the government's high decibel marketing of New India and the actual grounded reality of its aging and poorly maintained infrastructure. The failure to modernize the maintenance, repair, and overhaul sector within India has made the airline entirely dependent on global vendors who are currently paralyzed by their own supply chain woes. The internal engineering lapses, the suspension of top officials, and the ongoing financial bleeding are all symptoms of a leadership that prioritized a quick sale over a deep structural fix. As we watch the next 3 to 4 years, the primary indicator of success will not be the new livery or the seat comfort, but a boring technical number, the fault ratio. If that number does not drop below 1.0, all the capital in the world will not be enough to save the carrier from international irrelevance. Ultimately, the Air India story serves as a warning about the limits of political branding. You can announce a transformation plan and celebrate the purchase of hundreds of new jets, but you cannot bypass the laws of physics or the requirements of international safety standards. The world is watching to see if India can actually govern its own skies, or if it will remain a market that is merely served by others.